You know what's ridiculous about the way people talk about Japanese bodyweight habits? They act like it's some mystical discipline ceremony, like everyone woke up at sunrise, bowed to a cucumber, and defeated hunger through moral superiority. No, that's the lazy version. A lot of it is just environment doing the boring work before willpower even gets invited to the meeting. Smaller portions, less sugar in everyday foods, meals that actually look like meals, walking baked into the day, food that doesn't constantly scream, "Eat me in the car like a raccoon with a deadline." So when someone struggles with weight in a hyper-snackable, oversized, sugar-loaded food environment, that is not a character flaw. That is a person trying to win a staring contest with a casino. And the casino has snacks. The loop usually starts quietly. You try to be good. Then the day gets annoying. Then lunch becomes whatever is fast, huge, salty, sweet, and emotionally available. Then dinner arrives late because life is apparently a group project where nobody did their part. Then the body's tired, the brain is irritated, and the kitchen turns into a tiny theme park of bad decisions. And because modern dieting loves drama, every bite starts carrying weird emotional paperwork. Was this allowed? Did I ruin it? Should I start over Monday? That mental circus is exhausting. Meanwhile, many Japan-associated habits reduce the circus before it starts. Not through heroic restriction, through boring, repeated exposure. Rice, fish, soup, vegetables, fermented foods, smaller plates, convenience stores with actual meal options, and a culture where walking is not treated like a punishment for eating bread. That is not magic. That is friction design. Here's where it gets interesting. If you grow up around giant portions, dessert-level drinks, constant snacking, and value meals the size of furniture, your brain learns a very simple rule. Abundance equals normal. Then when you suddenly try to shrink everything with a diet plan, the body does not go, "Lovely, we are now optimized." It goes, "Excuse me, who authorized this hostage situation?" That is reactance. Not in the dramatic teenager way, in the human way. When food starts feeling controlled, restricted, or morally judged, the brain often treats eating as autonomy reclamation, a little private rebellion, a tiny edible protest. And honestly, fair, because nobody likes feeling managed by a salad. Japan-associated patterns often work differently because the regulation is less visible. The portion is smaller before you negotiate with it. The sweetness is lower before your dopamine throws a parade. The walking happens before the fitness app starts acting like a disappointed parent. The meal has structure before hunger turns into a goblin. And the body gets repeated signals that fullness is not an emergency brake. It is a normal landing. And then biology walks in with the world's most annoying clipboard. Because the body is not just counting calories like a tiny accountant in your stomach. It is responding to texture, speed, visibility, sweetness, volume, timing, and reward. A sweet drink disappears in 20 seconds. The brain barely registers it as food. Then a huge portion lands in front of you, and suddenly normal dinner has the surface area of a welcome mat. Then you eat fast because the day trained you to treat lunch like a pit stop. That is dopaminergic amplification with a paper napkin. The reward system gets loud. The fullness signal arrives late. And by the time the body says, "Hey, maybe enough," the fork has already signed 3 more contracts. This is where Japan-associated habits become less mysterious. Meals tend to create more environmental visibility. Smaller dishes, separate components, soup, rice, protein, vegetables, pickles, a tray that lets the brain see the meal as a full landscape instead of one giant beige landslide. Not because Japanese food is magically pure, because the structure slows the stampede. It turns eating from a blur into an event the body can actually track. And once you see that, the whole strategy changes. The goal is not to become a monk with a bento box. The goal is to stop letting your environment mug your body signals in broad daylight. Because when food is always oversized, hyper-sweet, hidden in packaging and eaten while scrolling, the body has to guess through fog. That is where neurohabituation matters. The brain adapts to what it repeatedly sees. If it repeatedly sees large portions, large becomes normal. If it repeatedly sees dessert-level sweetness in drinks, subtle sweetness starts tasting like wet cardboard with self-esteem issues. If it repeatedly eats while distracted, fullness becomes background noise. Japan-associated habits often pull those signals back into view, not through punishment, through repetition. A smaller bowl stops looking tiny after the brain sees it enough times. A less sweet tea stops tasting boring after the tongue calms down from its sugar carnival. A slower meal stops feeling awkward after the nervous system realizes nobody is chasing it with a clipboard. This is not glamorous, it is not sexy. It is the behavioral equivalent of moving the snack bowl off the desk and pretending you made a profound life transformation. But that boring shift matters because visibility reduces the need for heroic control. And heroic control is where most people crash. Now, here's the part nobody likes because it ruins the drama. Tracking can help. Not because every human needs to become a spreadsheet with hair, but because vague eating creates vague panic. And vague panic is where bad decisions breed like raccoons behind a restaurant. You think you ate too much. You think you blew it. You think one snack somehow destroyed the entire architecture of your future body. That is algorithmic quantification doing what your tired brain cannot do at 10:47 p.m. It removes the fog, especially when an app lets you log meals quickly, scan foods, or use photo-based tracking instead of turning lunch into a courtroom deposition. That matters because the less mental labor it takes to notice food patterns, the less likely tracking becomes another hamster wheel of shame. So if you want to test this framework without making food your second unpaid job, use a tracking app with fast logging and portion estimates for a week. Not to punish yourself, not to earn your dinner like a medieval peasant, just to see the pattern. Where sugar sneaks in, where portions quietly inflate, where meals get skipped, and then the evening turns into a snack hostage negotiation.
Hand it over.
Where walking disappears because modern life has decided chairs are a personality. That external tool offloads the math so your brain can go back to being a brain, not a nervous little calorie detective wearing a trench coat. And when the data gets calmer, the body conversation gets clearer. Because the real endgame is not control, it is recognition. You start noticing that weight regulation is not one giant moral exam. It is hundreds of tiny defaults repeating until the body believes them. Early food exposure, meal structure, portion exposure, sugar baseline, meal timing, walking frequency, eating speed, meal attention, body signal tracking. None of these are magic by themselves. Together, they become the water the fish swims in. And that is why comparing Japanese lifestyle patterns to diet-centered weight loss attempts can feel so unfair. One system quietly shapes behavior all day. The other waits until you are exhausted and then hands you a rule book. Of course, people struggle. Of course, they rebel. Of course, they eat fast, snack late, overdrink sugar, ignore fullness, and then wonder why their body feels like a committee meeting with no chairperson. That does not make them weak. It makes them human in an environment built like a buffet with Wi-Fi. So maybe the more useful question is not, why can't I control myself? Maybe the better question is, what keeps asking me to control myself every 5 minutes? Because long-term weight regulation is rarely about one heroic decision. It is usually about making the quiet defaults less insane. And if this hit a little too personally, good. That means the pattern is visible now. Comment defaults if you want the next breakdown on how meal structure changes appetite before willpower even enters the room. And subscribe because the next one is going to make your snack drawer feel personally exposed.